If you had opened the Financial Times in 1994, you would have found the financial obituary of an Italian giant. Maglificio Calzificio Torinese, the parent company of Kappa, had declared bankruptcy. The factories were idle, the cash flow was decimated. The unsustainable weight of their manufacturing operation had crushed the company. To any market analyst at the time, the brand bearing the iconic Omini logo, the couple sitting back to back, had become a toxic financial asset, an unrecoverable ghost of a sporting past. Now, fast forward the clock to the reality of 2026. Walk the streets of Milan, London, New York, or Tokyo. The Kappa shirts developed for niche clubs like Venezia FC, Real Betis, or Athens Calathea are simply not treated as football kits. They sell out in a matter of minutes on e-commerce platforms and are immediately flipped on the secondary market with the exact same frenzy as drops from Supreme, Palace, or luxury timepieces. Kappa has abandoned the discount racks of department stores to walk the runways of Paris Fashion Week. It has become the absolute epicenter of global coolness and luxury streetwear. How is this mathematically possible? How did a company that was literally dead, being liquidated in the courts in the 1990s, resurrect itself to dominate contemporary urban aesthetics, and do so without 1% of the marketing budget of Nike or Adidas? The answer the sports media gives you is about fashion, design, and nostalgia. But the real answer, the one the investors know, has absolutely nothing to do with sport, athlete sponsorships, or the cut of the fabric. The answer lies in financial engineering and the surgical management of intellectual property. The corporate turnaround of Kappa is, in reality, a business masterclass on how to abandon a bloody and highly inefficient war for market share, to operate exclusively on a model of cultural arbitrage. They understood that the true value of the corporation was not located in the sewing machines, the factories, or the shipping logistics, but purely in its brand equity. They didn't go back to manufacturing clothes. They built an operating system. I am your auditor. Pull up a chair to the boardroom table and welcome to the Kappa Pivot. To understand the sheer genius of the resurrection, we must first perform a clinical autopsy on the death. In the 1980s, Kappa was an absolute behemoth. They dressed the legendary Juventus side of Michel Platini. They dressed FC Barcelona. They even sponsored the United States track and field team at the Los Angeles Olympics. To the untrained eye of a casual fan, this looked like total, unassailable market dominance. But to a forensic accountant looking at the balance sheet, it was a ticking time bomb. Kappa had blindly walked into what we call the scale trap. When you attempt to compete directly against apex predators like Nike and Adidas for global market share, you are no longer in the sports apparel business. You have entered a brutal race-to-the-bottom commodity war. And to fight a volume war, you must physically own the battlefield. You must own the entire supply chain. You build the massive brick-and-mortar factories. You employ tens of thousands of garment workers. You stockpile physical inventory in shipping containers, and you swallow the crippling, highly volatile logistics costs. Every single one of those elements is a catastrophic drain on your EBITDA. Kappa was generating massive top-line revenue through global sales, but their operational expenditure, the sheer cost of keeping the machines running, was eating them alive. The profit margins collapsed entirely. The physical infrastructure, which was supposed to be their greatest strength, became an anchor around their neck. By 1994, the crushing weight of that physical operation sank the ship into total bankruptcy. It brings us to the most fundamental rule of the boardroom. Revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, but cash is reality. The original iteration of Kappa tried to be a traditional heavy industry manufacturing empire, and they failed spectacularly. Enter Marco Baglione,
a man who looked at the smoldering wreckage of a bankrupt Italian corporation and saw a massive asymmetric opportunity where the rest of the market saw only toxic liabilities. Baglione, a former Kappa employee, walked into the bankruptcy courts, but he didn't buy the brick-and-mortar factories. He didn't bid on the rusting looms, the sprawling warehouses, or the complex employment contracts of thousands of workers. He looked at the bloated, sunken corpse of Kappa and surgically extracted the only asset of actual, undeniable value, the intellectual property. He essentially bought the JPEG of the Omini logo. With that singular asset, he founded a new holding company, BasicNet, and this is where the true financial alchemy occurs. You must understand that BasicNet is not an apparel company. It is a technology and IP management firm. They engineered what we call the asset-light revolution. To grasp their business model, you have to stop thinking about cotton and polyester and start thinking about Silicon Valley. BasicNet operates as the precise equivalent of a software as a service, a SaaS platform, applied to the global garment industry. BasicNet centrally manages the brand equity from their headquarters in Turin and engineers the master design files. They then license the exclusive rights to produce, market, and distribute the physical clothing to a network of independent third-party partners across the globe. The licensee in Brazil assumes 100% of the capital risk to manufacture the Vasco da Gama shirt. The licensee in Asia funds the logistics and distribution of the tracksuits. BasicNet does not touch a single needle. They hold absolutely zero physical inventory. They are entirely insulated from supply chain bottlenecks, the geopolitical chaos of shipping container routes, and the crippling inflation of raw materials. They simply sit in their boardroom and collect a strict, unyielding percentage of royalties on every single garment sold worldwide. It is a business model of pure, unadulterated margin. It is infinitely scalable. While traditional titans like Nike burn billions of dollars annually just to maintain the heavy, grinding machinery of their global production lines, BasicNet operates as a lean, agile financial holding company, passively extracting dividends from the cultural power of their own logo.
But a brilliant boardroom model on a spreadsheet does not physically sell a garment. To capture market attention, you require a product that fundamentally disrupts the visual landscape. Enter the year 2000 and the UEFA European Championship. Francesco Totti steps onto the pitch wearing the legendary Kappa combat shirt. Prior to this exact moment, global football kits were uniformly baggy, heavy, and shapeless, essentially generic polyester draped over an athlete. The combat shirt aggressively rewrote the geometry of the sport. It was manufactured from elastane, engineered to sit skin-tight, effectively acting as a woven armor to prevent opposition defenders from pulling the Italian players' shirts. However, beyond the sheer tactical functionality, that skin-tight silhouette birthed an entirely new commercial segment, the performance aesthetic. The shirt ceased to be mere sporting equipment. It became high-end fashion design. That was the initial spark, but the true, enduring genius of the BasicNet era arrived shortly after through the ruthless implementation of a corporate thesis we call scarcity as strategy. The executives in Turin looked at the astronomical 9-figure sponsorship fees demanded by apex institutions like Real Madrid and Manchester United, and they made a calculated, highly disciplined financial decision. They simply stopped trying to compete. They pivoted entirely to a philosophy of brand equity over market share. They deliberately abandoned the saturated mass market and began aggressively targeting niche clubs. They sought out institutions with immense aesthetic potential, profound cultural roots, and fanatically engaged local demographics, but which were largely ignored by the monolithic sports brands. Look at their meticulously curated portfolio. Venetia FC, floating in the most romantic city on earth. Real Betis, the beating, rebellious soul of Andalusia. Vasco da Gama, carrying the deep socio-historical weight of Rio de Janeiro. Athens Calathea, projecting the raw, unpolished aesthetics of Greece.
Kappa is not attempting to sell a mass-produced, generic jersey to a casual tourist looking for a Lionel Messi replica. They are selling directly to the archivist, the art director, and the high-net-worth consumer who views football apparel as a highly curated extension of urban culture. By deliberately limiting production runs and focusing on profound aesthetic detailing, they ensure the product remains highly exclusive. And in the luxury market, scarcity generates feverish desire. That desire, ultimately, is what commands and sustains premium pricing. The global fashion industry, operating on a highly predictable, cyclical algorithm, inevitably turned its gaze backwards. And when it finally looked to the past for inspiration, it found Kappa patiently waiting to capitalize on the regression. Welcome to the macroeconomic phenomenon known to the consumer as Blokecore, the prevailing aesthetic trend where Generation Z and high-net-worth millennials seamlessly integrate vintage football apparel with haute couture. When this cultural wave broke across social media and global capitals, Kappa did not merely surf it, they owned the underlying intellectual property of the ocean. BasicNet executed a series of surgical, highly leveraged partnerships with the apex predators of luxury streetwear. They did not dilute the brand by mass-producing retro shirts for discount retailers. Instead, they orchestrated strictly limited collaborations with Palace Skateboards, Gosha Rubshinsky, and Marcelo Berlon. They effectively took the exact geometric logo worn on the terraces by English football hooligans in the mid-1990s, repackaged it, and seamlessly injected it onto the exclusive high-fashion runways of Milan and Paris. In the boardroom, we define this precise mechanism as cultural arbitrage. BasicNet purchased the nostalgia of the 1990s for absolute pennies during the bankruptcy hearings, held the asset through the wilderness years, and ruthlessly sold it back to the global market as a luxury commodity 30 years later. The unprecedented global hype surrounding Venezia FC was not a happy, organic accident of internet culture. It was a meticulously orchestrated campaign of corporate repositioning. It was executed by elite high-end design agencies like Bureau Borsche in Munich and entirely underwritten by Kappa's new philosophical framework. They fundamentally altered the utility of the product. The football shirt ceased to be a functional, sweat-wicking garment you wear to play a muddy match on a Sunday morning. It was aggressively and successfully repositioned as the single most desirable premium item in the modern urban wardrobe for a Friday night out. They turned a sports uniform into a status symbol, and in doing so, unlocked a profit margin that traditional sportswear manufacturers can only dream of.
So what exactly can the chief executive officer of a Silicon Valley tech startup or the marketing director of a bloated legacy corporation learn from the forensic case study of BasicNet and the resurrection of Kappa? There are 3 brutal, uncompromising rules to take back to your boardroom. Rule number 1, never, under any circumstances, fight your enemy's war of attrition. If a monolithic apex predator like Nike or Adidas is playing the relentless low-margin game of global volume and scale, you must categorically refuse to engage. You pivot. You play the high-margin game of surgical niche and manufactured scarcity. Rule number 2, monopolize the intellectual property and ruthlessly outsource the operational liability. The true underlying valuation of your enterprise is rarely found in the physical machinery, the logistics network, or the sprawling warehouses. It is found purely in your intellectual property and the lucrative licensing network you architect around it. Let someone else swallow the capital expenditure and the supply chain risk. Rule number 3, brand equity cannot be bought. It must be meticulously cultivated. Venezia FC does not win the UEFA Champions League. Vasco da Gama and Real Betis endure constant, agonizing periods of sporting crisis on the pitch. But the underlying aesthetics, the curated narrative, and the urban culture engineered around those institutions are fundamentally immune to the chaotic results on the grass.
The original iteration of Kappa bankrupted itself because it stubbornly tried to be just another heavy industry sportswear manufacturer. It was only resurrected when it fully embraced its new identity as an asset-light holding company for culture. If you have reached the end of this financial autopsy and you still believe this was a video about polyester football shirts, you simply have not been paying attention to the spreadsheet. I am your auditor. Meeting adjourned.